This is The Next Chapter with your host, Amazon bestselling author Fred Hughes. So, a show about books. Why? And what gives, me the right to talk about books? Well, let's talk about the show and books. It's not going to be just a show about books. Sure, there'll be authors that I interview that talk about and pitch their next book and try to convince you to buy it. But as a part of that, they're also going to talk about how they write and how they got started writing and how they created characters, everything there is to do about writing. So authors are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how do I write a book. And I'm not meaning me, Fred Hughes. I'm talking about you. Everyone has stories. I get out and about and I go to conventions or go to writer seminars, and people constantly ask me or come up to me and say, I've got a story. How can I write a book about it? So we're going to talk about that. There'll be whole shows devoted to writing books. How do I write a book? How do I get it ready to be published on Amazon? How can I get that book in front of an author or another author or a publisher? So we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about some other things in the world of books. The difference between trade publications, i.e. I'm talking Simon & Schuster or Macmillan or Bain or Tor Books, down to other, what we call in the business, minor publishers or lesser publishers, people like Chris Kennedy Publishing or Three Ravens Publishing. There's a multitude of others. Most of them specialize in particular subjects. Or independent publishing, meaning you write your book, you prepare it, upload it to Amazon, and just sell it on your own. All of that's going to get talked about on various shows. And then, what do I do once I have a book? What do I do with my books, the books that I write? And we're going to talk about that in later in the show. But how do I sell books? It's not enough if you want to get people to buy your books. It's not enough to just write it and put it out there on Amazon and say, okay, done. It's out there. I can now put in my obituary that I was a published author. Frankly, that's what I did. And then people started buying it, and I discovered I can actually make some money doing this. But it takes having a story and convincing people to buy it and getting it out in front of people. So those are all things that we're going to talk about in future episodes. Now, books. Why a whole show about books? Gallup poll came out late last year. 55% of Americans, what's our population up to now? 350 million, something like that. 55% of all Americans read at least 12 books last year. That's one book a month. As a part of that poll, they also said that the average American read 12 and a half books. So if only half the population, roughly 55%, read books, and the people who read books read 12 and a half, that means the people who are reading read 20, 25, 30 books. I mean, I don't read, I actually listen because hey, I'm an old guy, eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I listen to books. But I do still read. My Kindle, blowing it up so that the fonts are big so I can read it. So there are a lot of Americans reading books, and I'm going to guess that most of the people out there that are watching this show are reading books. Now, What kind of books are people reading right now? What kind of books do Americans read? The number one best-selling genre in America. No, it's not romance, believe it or not. Romance is third. The number one best-selling is mystery and action. So your Alistair MacLean, Brad Pitt novels, your one of the popular character categories right now is noir, detective books, action adventure books. Those are the best-selling books in America right now, or the number one selling books in America right now. Right behind them, surprisingly enough, is horror. So horror books sell a lot. I live here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I went to a local authors convention to sell books, and I think there were 65 or some odd tables in the auditorium. It was called Texas Author Con #2, and Merrill David ran it really well, but I came there, set up my book, and sold, and had all my books out selling them. And I was there couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 people in this large room that weren't selling horror or post-apocalyptic or zombie books. So yes, there are a lot of authors that are out there publishing them, a lot of great authors, and hey, Stephen King's at the top of that list. But there are a lot of authors that make a lot of money and sell a lot of books in horror. So, and then number 3 is obviously romance, and enough said about that. But there's, believe it or not, there's more books in romance that technically fall into the romance category than your traditional Harlequin novels that, like my mom used to pick up in the grocery store in the checkout lane. Every single genre in literature has a separate romance section. There is such a thing as science fiction romance. If you look up the categories on Amazon, the same with adventure romance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So romance falls into all those categories. And over the course of this show, I'm going to get some of those people who write romance, people who write action adventure. Obviously, I write military science fiction, so I'm going to have a few people that do that on the show to talk about why they write what they write. So I hope that you find that interesting, and that's what we're going to talk about in the show. Other people that we're going to have on the show to talk about things. We're going to have people on that talk about marketing, how authors market books, and how you can market books. And it just doesn't apply to books. Some of you might do your own crafting. Believe it or not, marketing is marketing. So me having experts talking about how different authors market the books online is going to help you, or might help you, sell the widget or the dog washing, grooming service that you run out of your own home, et cetera, et cetera. So that expert advice can help you reach people online. I'm going to have publishers online. I actually talked to my publisher, Chris Kennedy, yesterday about some of my author stuff. But at the same time, I said, hey, I told him previously about this show that I was starting, and hey, I want you to come on, and oh, by the way, I want you to come on twice. Once to talk about Chris Kennedy, the author, and the other one will be to talk about Chris Kennedy, the publisher, because that's 2 different things. So he's an author that writes books and makes money doing that, and he is also a publisher that has convinced other people, such as myself, to write for him and make money for both of us, and how that works. So enough about what we're going to talk about as far as the show moving forward. I'm not prepared to talk about who's going to be on yet because, frankly, haven't arranged anyone yet. I wanted to get this first show done first and then start inviting some friends to be interviewed, and then talk about what we're going to, what they'll discuss when they're on the show. So, getting close to the break. So, next segment, I'm going to talk about Fred Hughes and how I got started in writing and how I became a best-selling author. So, hang around. We got to break and pay some bills. So, right after the break, we'll talk about my favorite subject, me. And we're back, surprisingly enough. And I hope you're back and listen to me ramble about my favorite subject, which is me. So, Fred Hughes, who is this guy that's going to be talking to us about books and writing and everything else over the next few weeks? Or hopefully years, who knows, for however long they want to keep me. Some background about me. Obviously, you see, I'm an old guy. Been around the block a time or two. I spent 20 years in the service, riding submarines, pushing submarines around the ocean in the United States Navy. And I'll say this up front, I won't say I was a horrible sailor. I was lazy. I was not a good sailor. I actually knew my job very well. Anyway, enough about that. I was an okay sailor. Got out of the Navy, like I said, did 20 years, got out of the Navy, and then ran around as a hired gun working for a variety of companies, going in and helping them fix their maintenance departments. After 20 years of doing that, and this is how I got into writing, January of 2020, was it 2021? No, excuse me, 2020. The company I was working for at the time consolidated their manufacturing facilities from 3 facilities into only 1. So there were 3 maintenance leaders that they currently had, and they only needed 1, and I was one of the odd people left out. So all of a sudden, I was unemployed in January of 2020 and said, okay, I'm going to take a month or so off because I had frankly been busting my butt in getting the new facility built and, yes, feeling a little sorry for myself. So I sat on the back deck here in Dallas because you can do that in January most of the time. And we all know what happened in February of 2020. All of a sudden, there was this virus running around the country and closing things down. So finding a job became very difficult, and I said, you know what? Hell with it. I can say hell, right? Checking with the beautiful Stephanie, my producer. So I said, I'm just going to retire. Have my military retirement. I'll go ahead and draw Social Security early, and I'll just retire. And so I did. Filed the paperwork, started getting paid, and my wife, who's the real boss of this outfit, promptly informed me that you are not going to sit on the back deck, smoking cigars, listening to audible books. Why don't you write the book that you've been writing in your head for as long as I've known you? So I said, okay, it gives me something to do. So got the computer out and created a Word document, and I started writing what eventually became a book called The Prince Awakens, which is the first story in the Prince of Britannia saga. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details this segment about the book. I will next segment. But The background story on this is that I suffered from anxiety and had problems going to sleep at night. So to help go to sleep and to keep my mind occupied and not just going all over the place, I wrote this story in my head. It's actually not the story I wrote. My wife thinks it is, and I'm going to tell a secret. Prince Awakens is not the story I wrote for years in my head. That book is yet to be written. But I wrote The Prince Awakens. It literally took me a year to write the book because I didn't know what I was doing. And then I said, you know what? I've got it written. And like I said earlier, I can put in my obituary, I'm a published author. So I hired an editor who turned out not to be very good to edit it, found someone to create a cover, and I uploaded it onto Amazon. And we're going to talk about how that whole process worked. Basically, it's easy. And Amazon will, if you want to take the effort to put it in the right format and upload it, Amazon will sell it. Book, whatever. I mean, they will screen it for basic quality issues, like if you have too many misspelled words, etc. They will flag them and send it back to you. But I put it up on Amazon and I started selling a few books. In the meantime, I'd been, out of work for a year. An acquaintance contacted me and said, do you want to go to work for, I won't name the company. They're interested in you as to head their maintenance department. And I said, well, no, I'm not interested in running a maintenance department anymore, but I'll come on board and help whoever the new person is, hire me as a supervisor or whatever, and I'll help them get things organized. So that was the agreement I reached with the company. And I worked about 2 months and realized that all these people were bothering me about The Prince Awakens. I mean, it had been out like 3 months. And all of a sudden people are bothering me and asking me, when's the next book going to come out? When's the next book going to come out? Well, I didn't really write it to be more than one book. I mean, I left it open for that. Fortunately, I was smart enough to do that. But so I said, you know what? Maybe I am halfway decent at this. So I actually left the job, went back to writing full time, and so I wrote the second book, which was called Prince Commander. And then shortly after that, I wrote the third book in the series, which was called Prince War Leader. Excuse me. Those books were written and initially published as an independent. So I'm writing, publishing, handling all marketing, creating ads, doing all of that. Schlepping my butt around the country, going to conventions to try to introduce myself to people so they would begin buying my books. An acquaintance said, hey, have you ever talked to this guy, Chris Kennedy? He has a small publishing house and he publishes military science fiction. I think you'd be a perfect fit. He'd be a perfect fit for publishing your books. So I reached out to him, and I should have known that I didn't know everything that was going on. And it turned out I was operating in somewhat of a vacuum because I knew nothing about the author books. I had written 3 books and had them out there and was making okay money and but knew nothing about the actual industry. And I reached out to Chris Kennedy. He immediately took my call, and then we had a Zoom call, and within 24 hours I had a signed contract with Chris Kennedy Publishing to write for him, and he would republish the books in the Prince of Britannia series. We'll talk about what came next after the next break. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is the next chapter. we're back after the break. Fred Hughes in the next chapter. And first off, I have to say this. For those of you looking for Easter eggs, and if you notice something different between the last segment and this segment, there is. We recorded all of these segments, and I watched it, and I'm going, oh my God, I was so bad in the third and fourth segments. We have to redo this. So this is a redo. Otherwise, I might be, brought up before the Supreme Court for cruel and inhumane punishment for making you watch it. But anyway, so we left off. I had signed a contract with Chris Kennedy Publishing, had been an indie author. He agreed to take my existing 3 books and spiff them up by doing a complete re-edit on them. We kept the original covers, and then they were re-released. And so the first 3 books were released in October, then book 2 in November of 22, then book 3 in January of 2023. So in February of 2023, my 4th book, Prince Peacemaker, the first book that Chris did published for me, the first new book, hit the street. And then over the course of last year, I wrote 2 other books, Prince Renegade, which was released in March, and Prince Liberator, which was released in June. First part of this month, Prince Conqueror was released on January the 5th, and is still doing quite well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, I was making a little money with Chris Kennedy, I was making a little bit of money on my own. Why did I sign with a publisher, and what are the advantages or disadvantages of an author working with a publisher? Well, the first and foremost is he has access to better resources than I do. He had, the editors he was using were much better than the ones I had found to use before. He had actual cover artists that could do new covers. And if you look at the cover of book 7, it's a great cover. So there's those advantages. The other advantage that is someone like Chris Kennedy is his exposure between his mailing list, and I don't know how big Chris's mailing list, but it's got to be in the 4,000 to 5,000 range or even higher. So every week he sends emails out to 5,000 people saying, this is what's new at Chris Kennedy Publishing, and oh, by the way, this guy by the name of Fred Hughes just published a new book. You should go and read it. On top of that, there are the people that follow him on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other media sites, several thousand people that when he posts on Facebook that, hey, Fred Hughes just put a new book out, all of a sudden 5,000 people know that Fred Hughes has a new book out. So that's the advantage of having, one of the advantages of having a publisher. But there's a price for those advantages. You have to share profits with them. So, whereas before, when I was an indie author, I kept all the money that I earned selling books on Amazon. Now, Amazon got their cut, but the money left after that was all mine. Well, now I have to share that money with Chris Kennedy. So it's a quid pro quo. He provides services and takes a cut of the royalties as a part of that. What's the other negative? Well, to me, the other big negative is the fact that I don't control when my books come out anymore. One of the things that frustrated me last year was the fact that I had a book ready and into him in early September of last year. But and that book was actually Prince Conqueror. So there was literally, because of all the books that were already in the publishing queue, and there's a good picture of Prince Conqueror, which is, I think that's an awesome cover. I had to wait in line, and book 7 didn't come out till January. So there was almost a 5.5 month gap between book 6 and book 7, and that really disappointed me. And also disappointed some of my fans. But it's selling great, and so you take the good with the bad. It wouldn't be selling as well if I wasn't with Chris Kennedy. So, I mentioned earlier that and claimed that I was a best-selling author. I'm an Amazon best-selling author. What does that mean? All of you hear people or read book covers or hear authors introduce or describe themselves as, oh, I'm a New York Times best-selling author, or I'm a USA Today best-selling author. Well, those are two very prominent bestseller lists, and they only deal with books sold over the counter. So paperbacks or hardbacks sold over the counter, reported in, there's this industry standard that keeps track of all of that. So whether you buy it at Barnes & Noble or Hudson News or whatever, if you pick up that book, then it's counted, goes into the slot, and it's tallied up, and at the end of a month, these are the top-selling books for the New York Times or USA Today. Amazon only cares about the books that they sell. So what are the best-selling books on Amazon? So Prince Conqueror, when it came out, received bestseller tags in 3 different categories. We talked earlier about genres on Amazon. In the science fiction category, there are subcategories, a lot of them. Prince Conqueror was the #1 book in military sci-fi space fleet, galactic civilizations, and alien invasion. So it was #1 in each of those categories. Ultimately, it peaked out at number 850, which, doesn't sound that impressive. I was the number 850 book on Amazon. There were 849 books ahead of me. But there were well over 3 million books behind me. So 850 is a pretty good number. And it also means that I sold a fair amount of books and made a fair amount of money. When I signed with Chris Kennedy Publishing, it's sort of interesting. One of the other advantages that I didn't bring up is that all of a sudden you get exposed to a whole new realm of people. Other authors, editors, publishers, individuals who run conventions. So, instead of me filling out forms and having to beg to be invited to a convention as a author, when I mention to them that I'm interested in attending, it's like I don't have to fill any paperwork. They just put my name down on the list. But as a part of getting to know other authors, you get to learn about other points of view. You get to learn about advertising from people who have been doing it for years. You get to learn about editing and marketing and what to do at conventions from all these people. But I remember Chris Kennedy has a Saturday Zoom call. All the authors are entitled to jump on. There's regularly 7 or 8 of the maybe 50 or 60 people who write for Chris that attend it. We've had as many as 18 or 20 on at a time, but typically there's a hardcore group of about 7 or 8 of us that show up every Saturday night, which sort of says what kind of lives we lead. We write books and we talk to each other on Saturday nights. But when I first showed up, everybody, as the new kid on the block, even, they immediately, you could see on the Zoom call, everybody was typing my name into their computer to see, what is this guy, what has he written? And one of the authors there, Kevin Steverson, who is his #1 book is at the 2,500 reviews on it, asked me, why did you sign with Chris Kennedy? You're making plenty of money. And I'm going, well, like I said, was operating in a vacuum, didn't know how successful I was. I thought because I had only sold so much and I only had X number of reviews that I wasn't successful. And come to find out, if you get 50 reviews on a book over its entire life, you're extraordinarily successful. So having 1,000 reviews on a book, like Prince Awakens book 1 had at the time, I guess I was doing okay, but I didn't know that, and now I do. So after the break, which is coming up, we're going to talk about my series. What is this Prince of Britannia, and what is this Empire of Britannia? We'll be back after this break. Fred Hughes, see you soon. Thank you for letting us pay some bills. I'm still Fred Hughes, and this is the next chapter where we talk about books. Well, this whole show's been about me, which is sort of trying. It's hard to talk about yourself for this long. But anyway, I keep talking about my series, the Prince of Britannia series. So what is this whole universe I created? What's it all about? Well, we have to start off, or I need to start off describing what is this Empire of Britannia? Well, in the not too distant future, and this is talked about early on in book 1, a group of countries see that everything on Earth is going to hell, and so they decide, you know what, we need to take precautions to sustain the human race. So they started building these huge colony ships. And primarily the United Kingdom was the lead, and there were several other countries associated with the United Kingdom, part of the Commonwealth. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa got involved. And then there were a few other countries that decided they would get involved, i.e. The Scandinavian countries grouped together. Israel decided to team up with as part of the South African contingent. Well, they all built these huge colony ships, and they were designed to use the new hyperspace technology that had been recently discovered. Problem was that even though it had been recently discovered and ships had jumped into hyperspace and traveled to nearby star systems, it wasn't flawless. They hadn't figured everything else. It was actually quite dangerous. Well, when the fusion bombs began to fly, the orders was given. The colonists were already in cryogenic sleep aboard the colony ships. And the ship set off, jumped into hyperspace, and to be safe, they decided we're going to stay in hyperspace for a year. We want to get as far away from Earth as we can. We don't want this war chasing us. So a year, pop out of hyperspace, and they discover they're 1,000 light years from Earth. So they find suitable planets and started colonizing. And that was the beginning of what would become the Empire of Britannia. There were 8 initial colonies, sort of based on the 8 initial countries. There was Britannia, Highland, which was mainly Scottish, figure the odds, Ayr, Irish, Zion for the Jewish population, Cape Town with South Africans, Northland from the Finns and the rest of the Scandinavians, Dominion, which was the Canadian colony, and Oceania, which was the Australia-New Zealand colony. They formed the first colonies and then basically joined together into the Kingdom of Britannia, ruled by a king that was selected. And that eventually evolved into the Empire of Britannia as they discovered all these other lost colonies that had done the same thing that they had done. They were individual colony ships that had fled Earth because of the war or for other reasons. So colony started, fast forward 1,000 years, the empire has grown to be a pretty massive size. And you're introduced to the character Hazard King in book 1. He is an ensign, just graduated from, the Imperial Naval Academy, on his first ship, learning how to be a fleet officer. But Hazard King is a officer, a man with a secret. His mother is the Empress. He's the second son. His father had been a fleet officer before he had to give it up when he married Hazard's mother, the Empress. And he wanted to go into space and be an officer and defend the Empire. Well, the Empire had been at war for 100 years fighting this alien race. Hazard gets called home because his brother decides, I'm not waiting for mom to die. I'm taking the throne. And so Hazard comes home to stage a counter coup. And that's essentially what The Prince Awakens is about. Hazard, who was the second son, had no desire to ever be emperor, had no desire to even be part of the imperial family. He wanted to quietly go through life as an imperial fleet officer and help defend the empire. And all of a sudden, he's thrust into staging a counter coup against his brother. He acquires a ragtag team that eventually becomes known as Team Hazard, and infiltrates both the home system because his brother knows he's coming and wants to keep him out, and get to the planet, infiltrate the palace, which you would think the Imperial Palace is impregnable, but Hazard knows secrets. So he's able to get him in. They depose his brother. His mother is still in a coma, so he has to take over as regent. The rest of the series is essentially the adventures of Hazard as he continues life. His mother gets better, and he lets her be, and she takes over being empress again. But now he's the crown prince, but he doesn't want to be the crown prince. He wants to be a fleet officer. So the rest of the books in the series are his adventures on both becoming a fleet officer and maintaining the dual personality of being Hazard King, Imperial Fleet Officer, and Crown Prince Henry, heir to the throne. People like it. I enjoy it. We'll talk about what worked and didn't work, in this book, and what I've learned along the way in future episodes. But it's been a fun book to write. I just turned in book 8 to my publisher, which is Prince Dominator. Notice his theme through all the books. And I'm writing the outline for book 9, which I'll tell you right now is going to be Prince Emperor. It will be the last book in the Prince series. Not to say that Hazard's done, he isn't, but it will be the last book of Prince Hazard, or Prince Henry. So, that's it for this first episode. Hopefully I didn't screw up too much. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about a variety of things. Fred Hughes, the next chapter. I hope to see you next week.